I turned 40 last month. I remember standing in my living room, decorations up, cake on the table, soft music playing, waiting. I had sent out invites to my family, a few friends, even some of my daughter's close friends I knew. I waited, checking the time every few minutes, convincing myself they were just running late. An hour passed. Then 2. Finally, I blew out the candles on the cake myself, alone. Not a single person came. Not a call, not a message. Just silence. A week later, as I was scrolling through my phone, I saw a text pop up from my daughter. It read, "Mom's 37th birthday, $1,800 per person. Venmo me." No explanation. No. "Sorry we missed your birthday." Or, "We'll make it up to you." Just a bill. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. I felt this slow, creeping realization sink in. They didn't just forget my birthday. They didn't care. That night, I sat on the couch, thinking about everything, the years I had supported them, the money I had given, the sacrifices, the late nights, the worries, the endless giving. And now? They were throwing a lavish party for my wife's birthday, charging guests almost $2,000 each, and sending me a bill as if I were just another name on the list. So, I did something I had never done before. I opened my Venmo and sent my daughter $1. In the note I wrote simply, "Congratulations." Then I got up, changed the locks on the house, and one by one, I blocked every number, my daughter, my wife, their friends, even the extended family who had never once shown up when I needed them. 2 days later, I saw a notification pop up on my phone. My wife had tried to access our joint bank account. I had already anticipated it and had blocked access. That's when the calls started coming in, not to me, but to the police. That afternoon, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, 2 officers were standing there. One of them spoke gently. "Sir, we got a report you were missing. Your family's worried." I stood there for a moment, heart pounding. They had reported me missing. Me, the man who had been sitting right here, in the same house, the whole time. The man they didn't bother to show up for on his birthday, the man they hadn't called or checked on all week, except to send a party bill. I could feel the tension building in the room as I looked the officers in the eye. I took a breath, wondering what to say next. I had no idea that this was just the beginning, and that the real storm was yet to come. I stood in the doorway, looking at the 2 officers. One of them, a younger man with kind eyes, gave me a small smile. "Sir, your wife called. She said you've been missing for days. She was worried you might have done something to yourself." For a second, I didn't know whether to laugh or feel insulted. Missing? I hadn't left the house. I'd been here, every single day, sitting with my own thoughts, wondering how my life had come to this. I opened the door a little wider. "I'm not missing," I said quietly. "I've just been here." The older officer glanced around, eyes sweeping over the living room behind me, the half-eaten cake still sitting on the table, the empty decorations still hanging where I hadn't bothered to take them down. "Mind if we come in, sir? Just to check in, make sure everything's all right?" I stepped aside, letting them in. As they moved through the house, I felt my chest tighten. Part of me wanted to tell them everything. The ignored birthday, the sudden text asking for money, the cold way my daughter had billed me like I was nothing more than a guest at someone else's party. But another part of me felt ashamed. How had I let it get this far? The younger officer sat across from me. "When was the last time you spoke to your family?" he asked softly. I rubbed my face, feeling the weight of the past week press down on me. "I don't know," I admitted. "A few days ago? Maybe a week? They didn't come to my birthday. I guess I stopped answering after that." They exchanged a quick glance, and I saw the older one pull out his notepad. "Your wife mentioned you blocked their numbers, closed the joint account. Any reason you can share?" I hesitated. How do you explain years of slow, quiet hurt? How do you explain the loneliness that builds up when you give and give, only to be met with silence when you need something back? I shifted uncomfortably on the couch. "I just needed space," I finally said. There was a pause. I could feel the officers trying to piece together the situation, trying to figure out if I was someone they should be worried about, or if I was just another middle-aged man trying to handle a family falling apart. I heard the older officer's radio crackle softly. He spoke into it quietly, stepping aside, while the younger one stayed seated. "Look," he said gently, "we're not here to cause trouble. We just want to make sure you're safe. But your wife, she sounded pretty upset. She said you weren't yourself lately?" I felt something twist in my stomach. "Not myself?" I repeated under my breath. Wasn't it funny how quickly they painted me as the one who'd lost his grip, the one acting strange, when all I had done was stop putting up with their constant taking? Before I could answer, there was a knock at the door again. My chest tightened. I glanced at the younger officer, who raised his eyebrows slightly. "Expecting anyone?" he asked. I shook my head slowly. No, I wasn't expecting anyone. But something told me, deep in my gut, that whoever was on the other side of that door, this wasn't going to make things any easier. The knock came again, louder this time, echoing through the quiet house. I felt my breath catch as the younger officer stood up slowly, sharing a glance with his partner. I stayed frozen on the couch, heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't expecting anyone, I was sure of that. The older officer moved to the door, hand resting lightly near his belt, a cautious look on his face. With a slow, deliberate motion, he opened the door. My wife stood there. Behind her, I could see my daughter and two of her friends, their faces tight with tension. My wife's eyes locked on mine instantly, sharp and cold. "There you are," she said, her voice smooth but edged. "You had us worried." I stayed seated, feeling a surge of anger and confusion rise up in me. Worried? After everything, they were the ones showing up with the police, acting like I was the problem? I clenched my fists, trying to keep my voice steady. "You didn't come to my birthday," I said quietly, almost to myself. "Not even a message." My wife let out a short breath, half a laugh, half a scoff. "You're being dramatic," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Let's just get this sorted. We need to talk about the account. And the house." The younger officer shifted awkwardly, sensing the tension thickening. I could feel the room closing in, every nerve in my body on edge. My daughter stepped forward, her eyes hard. "Mom's party is tomorrow, Dad," she said flatly. "We need to know if you're paying or not." For a moment, the whole room went still. I could feel the weight of every choice pressing down on me. And deep down, I knew, something was about to snap. I stared at my daughter, her voice cold, her eyes sharp, not the little girl I used to tuck in at night or read stories to. She was standing there now, a grown woman, looking at me like I was nothing but a checkbook. Before I could respond, my wife stepped inside, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. She glanced around the house, eyes landing on the locked office door at the end of the hall. "You changed the locks on the house," she said, her voice tight. "But you didn't change the safe code, did you?" My stomach turned. I felt the officer's glance at me, sensing something shift. "We need the documents in there, and the account details," my wife continued, her voice growing sharper. "You've made this more difficult than it needed to be." Suddenly, the younger officer's radio crackled again, and he stepped aside to answer it. But in that brief moment, I caught something, a flicker in my wife's expression, a quick look exchanged between her and my daughter. My pulse quickened. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice lower, suspicious now. My daughter's face tightened. "You weren't supposed to block everything, Dad. Now we have to fix this." Before I could ask what she meant, I saw two unfamiliar men step into view at the door, men I didn't recognize. They weren't family. They weren't friends. I felt my chest tighten, the air suddenly heavy. My wife gave me a sharp look. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be," she said softly, almost like a warning. The officers hadn't noticed yet, but I had. And deep inside I realized, this wasn't just about a birthday, or money. Something much bigger was unfolding right in front of me. My heart pounded as the two unfamiliar men stepped inside, their eyes cold, scanning the room like they belonged here. The officers, still unaware, were speaking softly in the corner, their attention on the radio. I stood up slowly. "Who are they?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. My wife gave me a sharp, almost pitying look. "They're here to help us handle things, Mark. You've been unpredictable." She said it calmly, as if she were doing me a favor. My daughter crossed her arms. "We can't wait any more, Dad. The money, the house, it's all tied up. You're making things worse." For a split second, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, connecting pieces I hadn't wanted to look at before. The expensive parties, the constant spending, the sudden shift from affection to demands. This wasn't just about hurt feelings or a missed birthday. They had been planning something much bigger. The older officer finally turned toward us, noticing the tension. "Sir, is everything okay here?" he asked, his voice cautious. I forced myself to nod, though my hands were shaking. I needed to think fast. "I'd like to speak to the officers alone," I said, trying to steady my voice. "Please." My wife opened her mouth to object, but the younger officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, maybe let's give him a minute." Reluctantly, they stepped back. The two strange men lingered near the door, watching. As soon as they were a few steps away, I leaned close to the officers. "They're trying to take everything," I whispered urgently. "They brought people here. I don't know who they are. Please help me." The officers exchanged a glance, the younger one's face tightening. "We'll handle this," he said quietly. Suddenly, my wife's voice cut through the air. "Enough games, Mark." She stepped forward again, pulling out a folded document from her purse. "You've already signed the papers. You just didn't realize it." I felt the ground drop from under me. "What?" She smiled coldly. "Remember the paperwork I asked you to sign last month? You didn't even read it, did you? The house, the accounts, they're in my name now." My legs felt weak. I reached for the back of the chair, trying to steady myself. Just then, the older officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, we're going to need to see that document." The room was tense, every breath tight. My daughter looked away, arms still crossed. But then, the unexpected twist. "Actually," the younger officer said suddenly, pulling something from his pocket. "You're under investigation, ma'am." My wife's smile froze. "What are you talking about?" He held up a small recording device. "We've been looking into financial misconduct tied to your business. Your husband's name came up, but now it's clear who's really behind it." For the first time all night, I saw genuine panic flash across my wife's face. The two strange men at the door stiffened, eyes darting toward the exit. The older officer stepped forward, his voice firm. "We're going to need you all to stay right here." And just like that, everything flipped. I stood frozen, heart racing, as the world I thought was crumbling suddenly opened into something far darker, far more dangerous. And this, I realized with a chill, was only the beginning. I stood there, watching as the officers moved quickly. My wife's face had drained of all color, her hands trembling as she tried to argue, but the younger officer calmly read her rights. My daughter's arms dropped to her sides, her tough exterior crumbling as she realized what was happening. The two strange men by the door turned on their heels, trying to slip out quietly, but another set of officers had arrived outside. They were stopped immediately. It was like the air had cracked open. Everything they'd planned, everything they'd been hiding, was now exposed. I felt myself exhale for the first time in what felt like days. My knees almost gave out, and I sank onto the couch, my heart pounding but my mind finally starting to clear. The older officer came over, crouching beside me. "Mr. Daniels, we'll need you to come down to the station later to give a full statement. But for now you're safe." Safe. That word hit me hard. As they led my wife and daughter away, I felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. This wasn't just the collapse of a marriage or a family argument. It was the breaking apart of years of deception, the unmasking of truths I hadn't wanted to face. I watched them go, not with anger, but with an aching sadness. When the house finally fell quiet, I sat alone in the living room. The decorations from the birthday party I'd thrown myself were still scattered on the table, untouched. Balloons half deflated, a cake that had never been cut. I let out a shaky laugh, not because it was funny, but because life had twisted in ways I never saw coming. The next morning, I changed the last of the passwords, closed the final accounts, and started calling the people I had ignored: old friends, my sister, the neighbor who used to invite me for coffee. I realized how isolated I had become, not because no one cared, but because I had stopped reaching out. Days passed, and the story faded from the immediate headlines. But the lesson stayed sharp in my mind. Trust isn't something you give blindly, even to those closest to you. And love, when twisted by greed, can leave scars deeper than any betrayal by strangers. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on the porch with a coffee in hand, staring out at the quiet street. I felt lighter, not because everything was perfect, far from it, but because I was free from the lies, free to rebuild on my own terms. As the night settled in, I sent one last message, not to my wife or daughter, but to myself: you survived this. Now it's time to live again. And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it.